Welcome back to Thomas and Friends Read Aloud by Miss Jen Reads a Lot. This story is Don't Tell Thomas. It was cold and the island of Sodor was covered in a white blanket of snow, but the engines didn't mind at all because it meant that the Christmas holidays would soon be here, and that meant lots of fun. Thomas loved Christmas time because everyone was happy and jolly. The station masters decorated the stations with twinkly fairy lights and garlands, and children made snowmen and sang Christmas songs and carols. There was one thing Thomas didn't like about winter: his snowplow. He had to use it so that he could clear the snow from the railway lines, but he didn't like it at all. "Cinders and ashes," said Thomas. "I need it, so I've just got to put up with it." Thanks to all his hard work, the lines were kept clear and the trains ran on time. The other engines were very grateful to him. At Dryan Station, Toby and Harold were planning a surprise for Thomas. It was a thank you for all his hard work. As Thomas steamed into the station, he heard Harold say, "Remember, it's a surprise. Don't tell Thomas." "Don't tell me what?" asked Thomas. But Harold buzzed up into the air and Toby puffed back to the yard. Thomas felt cross. He didn't like being left out of things, and he loved surprises. That afternoon, Thomas met Percy, whose trucks were full of colored boxes. "Are they part of the surprise?" asked Thomas. But before Percy could reply, Harold hovered over them. "Shh," he said. "Don't tell Thomas." Later on, Thomas was puffing along his branch line with his coaches, Annie and Clarabelle. He couldn't stop thinking about the surprise. He really wanted to know what it was. He thought about it all the way to the end of the line. Then he thought about it all the way back again. When Thomas stopped at a signal, he saw Emily. She was pulling a long truck with something long and pointy wrapped in a cover. "Is that part of the surprise?" asked Thomas. "I can't say," said Emily, and she puffed away. "Wheesh," said Thomas. "If Emily won't tell me, I'll follow her and find out for myself." Thomas puffed along behind Emily as quietly as he could. He followed her through a tunnel, over a bridge, past the windmill, but when Emily turned onto a branch line, the points changed, and Thomas couldn't follow her. "Cinders and ashes," he cried. That night, the engines were all talking about the surprise, but they stopped when Thomas chuffed into the sheds. "Shh," said James. "Don't tell Thomas," said Henry. Poor Thomas felt more left out than ever. "Everyone knows about the surprise except me," he huffed. "Well, if they won't tell me, then I don't want to know." And with that, Thomas steamed away from the sheds as fast as he could go. Soon he was far, far away. When it was time for Thomas's surprise, the engines didn't know where he was. "I'll find him," said Harold. Thomas was in a siding right on the other side of the island. He was very cold, very lonely, and very sad. Then he heard a noise above him. It was Harold's whirlybird wings. "Come on, Thomas," said Harold. "It's time for you to take the children to see your surprise." "My surprise?" said Thomas. "Yes, it's our way of saying a special thank you for clearing the snow from the lines," said Harold. "So I wasn't being left out?" said Thomas. "Of course not," said Harold. "Now hurry along, old chap. The children are all waiting for you." Thomas collected the children, then he steamed off past the windmill, down the branch line, and into a little village. That's when Thomas saw his surprise, and what a really lovely surprise it was. Emily had been carrying a tall Christmas tree. It stood in the village square, shiny, with twinkly lights and bulbs and garlands. Around the trees were the presents Percy had brought. Thomas's driver put shiny tinsel around his funnel, and his surprise party began. "Peep! This was worth waiting for," said Thomas. "It's the best surprise I've ever had."